We are live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I am Kate Lee. I'm the editor-in-chief of Every. Here with Katie Parrott, our staff writer, who writes our working overtime column in addition to a lot of other stuff here at Every. And we're here to do a Q&A about writing with AI. We did our first writing camp on this past Friday about how Katie in particular uses AI in her writing process. We got so many questions. We did our best to answer them in the camp, but we got so many that we wanted to do a follow-up to answer those questions, over 50 of them, in fact, as well as field any new ones from the stream. Just as a reminder, Every is the only subscription you need to stay at the edge of AI. It consists of ideas, which is our newsletter, courses and camps and other kinds of content like that, our podcast as well, apps, so Chorus, Spiral, Sparkle, and Monologue, and training, so our consulting practice, as well as courses that we offer to subscribers. So, Katie, I don't know if you want to do any more introduction yourself. Otherwise, we'll get into it.
I think you covered the bases, so why don't we get started?
Okay. So we are going to go through the questions in themes, themed grouping. So we're not going to go through them in the order in which they were asked. We did put them together into a couple of themes. The first theme is style guides and anti-style guides. We had a lot of questions about that. So our first question from several people was, do you need to create a style guide for each project or one style guide for all projects?
Yeah, so it really depends on what you're doing and how you're using your style guides. So if you have it depends, like if you have multiple projects that you're working on, like for example, me at Every, as you mentioned, Kate, I write across working overtime, our vibe checks, which are our day 1 or day 0 model reviews, and then also source code with our studio team. And each of those columns is very specific in terms of its purpose, what it covers, and it has its own vibe and sensibility. And so in those cases, yes, I do have separate style guides for each of those kinds of publications. But we also have standard rules that we want to apply across all of Every's columns, right? So we also have sort of those brand level details in a standalone style guide, but that standalone style guide that has all of Every's values and best practices that apply across the columns, that's in its own style guide that gets added across all the different projects. So it really depends on how you have your projects set up and what you're using them for.
Great. Okay. So Luke asks, what's the difference between a style guide and a skill for writing?
Yeah, so style guides, it's funny, all of this has sort of evolved organically for me. And as new capabilities have emerged, you kind of have to fold them into your process or reconfigure your process altogether. So I started with style guides, which is it's just a Google Doc. Or it can be an MD file. The actual format of the file is less important than what it contains. But I started with the style guide attached to a project because that was sort of the form factor that was available at the time that I started really writing with AI in a dedicated way, the way that I do now. And then skills sort of came along more recently. And for those who aren't aware, a skill is a sort of a set of it's a prompt or a set of instructions that you can apply across chats and across different projects. So anywhere, like if you're using Claude, for example, any project, any chat, you can invoke a skill, whereas a project is a dedicated place you go that has its own context, its own instructions. And so the way that I think about them, I really prefer projects and style guides for big overarching stuff like that. I almost don't call my working overtime project a project anymore. I call it my environment because it has so much context and is set up for everything that I want working overtime to be. And then skills I use more for specific tasks within that. So like, for example, I have an AI check skill that runs a check to make sure that the content doesn't have any of those pesky signs of AI writing, like not X but Y, delve, and in an increasing or rapidly changing business landscape. Although that's an old one, man. AI hasn't done that one in a long time for me. So that's a skill that I have, is like check this content and make sure it doesn't have any of those signs. Or I have a thesis check that is like, is this thesis concrete and arguable? So I use skills for like smaller units of work, and then projects with style guides set up I use for the big picture stuff that I want to be applied consistently across whatever I'm doing.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that excuse me, that distinction between projects and skills is a question we get a lot, and how do you determine when to use one or the other? We did have a number of questions about AI tells in particular, and if you can say anything more about what you mean by tells, and if you feel like there are any really good AI tell skills that are out there, whether we've built them or you use anyone else's.
Yeah. So an AI tell is a sign. It is either a word, like diction is the technical term from writing, but it's either a word choice or a sentence structure or syntax that we can just tell comes from AI. It just kind of has AI smell. And it's something that, we see over and over and over again. And the reason that that's a problem is that, well, first of all, a lot of times these AI tells just don't convey any meaning. They seem like our managing editor Eleanor talks about how they seem like they mean something on first pass, and then you think a little bit about them and you're like, that doesn't really mean anything. So just empty words that are a waste of space is one problem with AI tells. And then another is that I think the big problem is that it creates doubt in the mind of the reader about whether a person actually stands behind this, and whether there's someone here, whether is there anyone there behind the scenes, like standing behind this content. And so you just, it's not about concealing the fact that you're using AI, but it is about making sure that the content is clear, readable, isn't just empty air, and that what you're saying as the human behind the AI doesn't get buried under a lot of AI speak.
Got it. We will come back to this topic in a moment. But in terms of just back to style guides for a moment, do you use things like Elements of Style or the AP Style Guide? How effective do you think either of those are?
Well, we have our own dedicated style guide at Every that sort of handles the majority of our rules. And I have that, we have that as a standalone document that we're able to use. I haven't necessarily experimented with trying to get like the entire AP style book into like a skill. That might be a little over ambitious for just like the limitations of what a skill is really set up to accommodate. But I know there are a lot of different tools out there that have some style guide capabilities built in, like Grammarly, which is now part of the Superhuman universe, has those kinds of things built in.
So once you have a style guide created by the AI, how do you refine it?
I spend a lot of time just in there editing. If there's something that I disagree with, I might just delete it and say, like, for example, like in my style guide for working overtime, when I started feeding it essays, it picked up a lot of phrases that it thought I invented. Like for a long time, I had to remind my working overtime project that I did not invent vibe coding, but it really over indexed on the idea that working overtime coins concepts. And so what started happening there is that when I was working with it, it kept reaching for coined concepts and like signature phrases that I was inventing that just didn't, like, they weren't organic, weren't natural. And so I went into the style guide and just deleted out coin concept as a goal, because that just didn't reflect what I wanted the writing to do. So making those kinds of decisions, changing the hierarchy of information, like if there's something really important, maybe I mention it at the top, mention it multiple times. We really want to make sure that the information hierarchy is clear, so that the AI can read it and knows what to sort of hone in on, which is why I do recommend using AI to create the style guide, because it will format it in a way that AI likes, because it is AI. But then in terms of the specifics, you just, even if like the output is good, I recommend going over it with a fine-tooth comb and just making sure that there's nothing in there that's weird that then creates problems down the line. Like my coin concept line, that was like a single line in the style guide, that became it really, really irritating over time.
So it seems like, a common theme, I think, through writing camp, and probably this is always like your layer of judgment and your layer of how you would actually use things, say things, etc., on top of what the AI generates.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's move into a next theme, which is kind of getting Claude set up, feeding Claude your voice and samples in order to create these guides. So first question is, can you feed Claude with a taste of other writers' pieces, let's say articles or tweets, when you yourself don't have a defined style?
Yeah, I think that is totally legit. That is like, it's something that I have done a little bit myself for just a side project that I have, which is my app that like helps to analyze your taste. But so I just thinking about writers that you admire. For me, it's people like Gia Tolentino, John Green, Leslie Jameson. These are all really high level editorial nonfiction writers who have voices and perspectives and just sentence or craft details that I really respect. And so I do the same thing I've done the same thing with essays and articles from them as I do with my own articles, which is just give it to the AI and say, what do you notice about this? And then give it the next piece and say, what do these two pieces have in common? I think when the really important part when you're building a style guide and a voice is it needs to be aggregated over the course of many pieces of writing in order to find the patterns and the commonalities. Because if you're giving a lot of disparate stuff that doesn't have that through line, then I don't think you're going to get you're not going to get that cohesive style guide that produces content in a really, really consistent way.
Got it. So along those lines, in terms of what works as input, could courses and conference transcripts work as input to Claude, especially for YouTube scripts? Eloisa Wolf asks.
I think that it depends on, I don't have as much experience translating from format to format. So I don't know, for example, if you input a transcript from a spoken call and try to translate that into a style guide for writing, things might go sideways there. Something we talked about on the camp is that there is a difference between your spoken style and your written style. And so taking written or spoken content and trying to translate that into a written style might go sideways, as my intuition, but I don't have like a ton of data to back that up. I will say though, and this is something that going from using a transcript to create an article, like in terms of the subject matter, is aces. That works really well, and that's something that we do at Every a lot.
Okay. Speaking of written versus spoken, how much should our written language style match our verbal language style, and how should audio transcripts influence identification of our communication style? This is from Jonathan Calvert.
Again, I think there's a certain difference in how we speak versus how we write, just because we process the information differently. So just from my talking now, you can hear that I say like and a lot, and those kinds of tells. You can often be very repetitive when you're speaking and say like the same thing 2 or 3 times as you're sort of circling the point you want to make. And in writing, you want to like say it once, say it well, right? Is something that we say a lot in the writing world. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Fine. So Julie asks, how do you explore new styles when you find yourself stuck in the same one?
That is a really good question. Yeah. I think the big thing, and this is where like vocabulary becomes really important, and having the language to describe what you want the style, whether that's like in terms of style on a word by word and sentence level, or like the structure, like on a more macro level of like the organization of the details and ideas. I think the more that you have the language to say, like, I want to make the sentence structure, more, expansive, and, or like fragment this through different prisms, like, the more you experiment with language and describing the writing you're looking for, the more I think you're going to get better at prompting the AI to deliver that style. I will say it is a challenge because AI does tend to regress toward a mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so it does take like very conscious engagement to sort of break up those patterns, bring in more variety, and it takes vocabulary to know what you what you're not happy with and what you want to see change when you're trying to diversify that style.
Well, I remember when you went through this where you were like, every one of my pieces is starting with this, and it's, starts with an anecdote and then zooms out, and you felt like you were getting a little bit, stuck. Is there anything you did then to recalibrate your guide?
Yeah, I actually added a couple of different structures. I went in because like that for the friction to framework framework is what it's called in my style guide, and that did like emerge organically out of the course of many articles that I had written before I even started using the style guide. So it's a real structure that is true to how I write, but it does get very repetitive. And so I added instead of like, I pulled out of the aggregate into, or drilled down from the aggregate into individual pieces that had different formats. And so now I have an arsenal of different structures that I can pull from. So it's not just friction to framework and start with what's hard and with the solution, but there's also like the step-by-step process format for when I'm like writing like how to do X, and different things like that. And so, but it does, so there's some stuff you can sort of program into it just by changing your documentation and your context, but then you still have to be vigilant. So like I've been writing an article today and it wants to start with a story, because so many of my articles start with stories, and I just had to straight up tell it like, we're doing this too much, like we need to find a different way into the piece. And that was just a piece of direction that I had to give, because it's done to death. It's cliche to say that AI is like a junior employee, but it really is. And sometimes you just have to give it instructions of exactly what you want it to do.
Right. Be extremely direct and repeat yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to move into the next theme, which is Claude project skills and custom instructions. We touched on this a little bit about the difference between a skill and a project. A skill and a writing guide, a style guide. So first things first, what are custom instructions, and can you provide an example?
Yeah, so custom instructions are instructions that you can plug into a specific place inside your project, both in Claude and ChatGPT. It's slightly different, the layout, obviously, so you have to kind of go hunting depending on which service you're using. But what they are is like a set of instructions that sort of communicate your preferences and how you want chats in the AI to respond to you inside that project. So again, a project can have a bunch of different chats in it, but if you have those custom instructions set, you're going to get a consistent behavior, a consistent kind of response. So that can be things as like, we have an AI editor project set up at Every that had like the custom instructions are like, really, really long and detailed, because we want that consistent behavior, that consistent output. And we want to make sure that the editor is looking at the same stuff consistently. And so that's really long. But then like in my working overtime project, where I want it to be more flexible and I don't want it to be just an editor or just a writer, I just have some things like, if you use not X but Y, I will come and haunt your family. So that those kinds of just do not do this. So that's how you use custom instructions.
Okay. Getting back to then a little bit about what we said before. So what, in terms of a skill, what is in the skill?
So the skill is it has like I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% like up to speed on the technical details, because the beautiful thing about Claude is Claude has a skill making skill. So if you want, so you like for the AI check skill that I built, the hook check, the thesis check, all these different checks that I've built, I told Claude I want to build a skill that does X, Y, and Z, and Claude, with this skill enabled, knows what the format needs to be. So I know, for example, that it involves YAML, YAML front matter, but I couldn't for the life of me tell you what that is. It's kind of that sense of like, it's you kind of let the technical details go in favor of just describing the outcome that you want, and then trusting the AI to build that in the way that you need it in order for the skill to be effective.
Okay. So kind of getting at the next question, which Eloisa Wolf asked again, what's the difference between skills and custom instructions?
It comes down to portability. So when you set up custom instructions inside of a project, those custom instructions live inside that project. And so if you want that kind of behavior that those custom instructions dictate, you need to go to that project and have your chat inside that project. A skill, on the other hand, you can invoke in any chat anywhere within your instance that the skill is enabled in. So you can just say use the AI check skill. And so for back to my use case, having source code working over time and vibe check, that the AI check skill that checks for AI patterns can be invoked across all those projects. And I don't have to re-upload it across, like in each individual project. It just exists across all of them. So projects are portable from chat to chat and project to project, whereas custom instructions.
Sorry, you mean skills are portable from chat?
Skills, yes. Oh my gosh.
Sorry.
Yeah, and custom instructions live within one project and dictate the behavior of that project.
Got it. Just picking up in comments, David Franzen just clarifies that YAML is metadata that tells Claude in a couple of short sentences what the skill does, its name, etc. So thank you for that information. David, I also saw you had a question. We will get to that shortly. I also wonder if one other way to think about custom instructions versus skills is like action oriented. You want it to do something. You want it to actively like check or do something, whereas custom instructions often is like setting the sort of context for what something should be, but I think of it as less kind of immediately action oriented. Maybe that's just my own way of thinking about it.
No, I think that's a really good point. It kind of runs in the background and sort of ensures that everything is behaving the way that you want versus it's not doing an actual task. I think that's a good split.
So Alexander Petrie asks, what is the process by which someone selects writing skills for their desired outcomes?
Well, the process by which one selects skills.
Someone selects writing skills for their desired outcomes.
Yeah. I think it's very contextual. So it depends on like where you are in the process, for example. And like different skills are going to be needed at different points in the drafting process. So, at the outline stage, you're really going to be looking at things like the organization. So maybe you have a skill that checks structure and makes sure that, information, flows logically from section to section, and that you're building a cohesive argument, and that might be a skill you build for the outline stage. The AI check is mostly relevant when you're finishing up and you're doing like line level edits on a piece that is drafted. Although you can also like have I tell the AI to use the AI check when I'm having it produce copy so that it hopefully comes out clean, so I don't have to run the AI check again. But that's an example of a skill that's more for the end of the writing process. And then there's a bunch of stuff that happens in between. I will say this is where, and this is something that we talked about at the camp, is that you can't really get out of learning the mechanics and the best practices of writing. You really have to learn things like how to talk about structure, how to talk about diction, how to talk about all these different, things, details about the craft of writing, so that you can communicate them to your AI and tell it, this is what, as you're building a skill for, let's say, enforcing your like style rules, like you need to be able to articulate what your style rules are, and that ultimately comes down to how much you know, how many, and like your own knowledge, and then also context that you're able to bring in from like trusted sources.
So, another question about this person, Patel asks, shouldn't writing guides be set up as a skill rather than custom instructions?
I actually have my style guide set up as neither. It's set up, it's just a Google Doc. Because, you know, I don't want, again, my project, I want it to be flexible in terms of how I use it. So I don't want to set custom instructions that cause it to just work as a writer or just work as an editor, because a lot of times I'm having it research or I'm having it do these different things, and I don't want the instructions to get too granular. But again, skills are like, you definitely could make your style into a skill. I actually have another skill called Katie Voice that I use. It's more for social, but sometimes I'll use it in my writing and be like, this just needs to, usually what comes out of it is self-deprecating humor, because that is the one thing that my style guide knows more than anything about me, is that's how I like to, you know, inject humor into my pieces. But so a lot of this is like, there are some best practices that work best for me, but I think you also have to trial and error a little bit whether it makes sense to have a project set up or to design a skill that has your style guide in it.
Got it. We're going to move on to the next theme, which is memory and context and document syncing. So, in your experience, Jillian Young asks, how is memory used and defined, and how does it influence outcomes?
Memory is something that has come a long way in the last 6 months to a year. Like, I know like Claude didn't used to have memory, and now it does, and you can sort of turn it on and turn it off. I know different people have different opinions about memory and whether to have it active or not active. So for example, we just published a piece about when you might not want to have memory enabled in chats, but I default to having memory on at all times. And so like Claude will like search chats for past references. And for me, that just, the more it knows about me and the more it can remember, the better I've found the experience to be from a writing perspective. But again, like you might find that like if you're getting bleed over and like again, if you have those really distinct verticals and like different kinds of writing that you're doing, then maybe there's a case for turning off memory in those cases. But
okay. So, okay, well, moving on into that super tactical question. Every time you update your style guide, do you remove the old one and attach a new one, or does Claude refer to the updated Google Doc?
Claude refers to the updated Google Doc. So when you make changes to that Google Doc, at least so far as I've seen, it picks it up and applies it pretty immediately. So my style guide, you know, and that goes for writing too. Like, you know, when you like connect a Google Doc to a chat in order to write, like not in the custom instructions, just in the flow of the usual chat, like that's honestly how I write, is I'll have a chat and I'll have a Google Doc. And so we'll like, the AI and I will go back and forth a little bit, and I'll transfer what I like into the Google Doc. And then I'll keep going. And then I'll say like, all right, I made some changes. Let's say I like made a change to the intro. I'll just say, hey, there's a new intro. What do you think now? And Claude can go look and see that the intro has changed. So that's one of the benefits of Claude, is just that Google Doc integration is really smooth. And so if you live in Google Docs the way I have for like my entire career, it's a really awesome sort of connection there.
Got it. Okay, so it syncs. It's great to know. Documents sync between Claude and Google Docs. Let's go into workflow and writing process. So at what point during a writing session do you start a new chat? Have you noticed longer sessions drifting from instructions as the context window fills up? Spencer Reary asks this question.
That's a good question. The biggest problem I run into is just running out of context. Like it'll just like, Claude will just tell me like, this is the max amount that a conversation can take. You need to start over. In my experience, that usually only happens when I'm like flailing and don't know what I want to say. Like if I'm hitting the max context of a chat before I have a draft that I'm happy with, it's probably a sign that I was floundering for what I wanted to say and was like going back and forth and like making the chat a lot longer than it needed to be. But that's where the memory comes into play, because like when you do hit that end of a chat, you can just tell them, you can start a fresh chat and say, can we pick up where we left off in the last chat? And Claude
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to like go read that previous chat and bring that context into the new one.
Got it. Just going to add in terms of syncing, just to be clear, we have this comment that if you want to sync your Claude with your Google Doc, you need to have enabled the Google Workspace integration. Thank you for sharing that comment, David. Moving on into workflow and writing process. So you talked in the camp about asking AI to interview you. Lori Leach asks, how did you ask AI to interview you?
I just like, one of my go-to prompts is just ask me questions one at a time to extract what I think about this topic, or something along those lines. I do always stipulate one question at a time. Otherwise, it will give me 20 questions and I'll get really overwhelmed. So that's really all I say. And the reason that I'm able to like keep it that light probably is because I have the style guide in the background that knows what, like, for example, what working overtime is and the kinds of questions it needs to ask in order to fill out a working overtime style content piece. But yeah, it just starts as simple as ask me questions to find out what I think.
That's great. Very, very open-ended. Okay, you've already referred to having a Claude window open and a Google Doc open and toggling between them. Getting a little bit further into that, can you edit in Claude, or do you have to copy and paste into a doc? Karen Henke asks.
That's one of the areas that like I think a dedicated, like the fact that Claude isn't really built as a writing tool becomes relevant, and like maybe someday it will be, and you'll have an editable canvas that you can just click in and make changes to. But right now, you do need to, if you want to make changes, you got to copy it into a Google Doc or a space where you have that editability, because Claude doesn't have that built in, to my knowledge.
Got it. So when Claude rewrites and you lose what you liked, is it possible to avoid that? Or are you able to always recapture something you liked from an earlier part of the chat?
Yeah, so I mean, well, if it's in the chat, you can always just scroll up the chat and find it. And then if it's in an artifact, so if you have it, like an artifact is like is like a space where where Claude shows you what it's producing for you. And sometimes that can be more sophisticated, like a report or like a mini app. Those are also artifacts. But like at a certain point when you're writing long form, it will just generally give you an artifact. And there's version history on those. So as you make changes, you can go back to the previous version. And if you lose something that you like, you can pull it back out of there.
But is it required to use an artifact?
It's not required to use an artifact. Usually I found that it does that when it's got like a long form piece of content that it wants to show you, like a full draft, or it doesn't like if it's just writing a paragraph, it probably won't deliver an artifact, because that just doesn't make sense for the content.
Got it. Next question from both Karen Henke and Daniel Green. How do you use quote unquote locked lines that the AI can't change?
Is that a feature of Claude? Locked lines that the AI can't change. I mean, that's where the Google Doc for me comes in, is like that, because like I control that, and whatever outputs that I want to keep and control, like I live in the Google Doc. But as far as I think you could probably tell the AI like keep this part and only change this part. Right. That might be more relevant in like using the terminal and the Claude app versus the chat interface.
Got it. Okay. We are going to move on to tools and platforms. we did get one question. I'll just say, David Franzen, and a question that leads into this, where you asked in the comments, how much of these types of good writing style guides and elimination of red flag AI phrases is built into Spiral. So Spiral is our AI writing assistant. For those of you who don't know, it's one of the 4 products we offer in our bundle. And so I actually did a little chat with the GM of Spiral to just get the best answer that I could. And here's what he said, which is that, and I'll answer this question now. The best answer is that the Spiral system prompts are written based on Every's editorial principles. And then you, the user, can add your writing samples to teach Spiral how to write more like you. We do discourage phrasing in the system prompts like M dashes, reporter voice, learn the secrets, marketing hype, certain opening patterns. And we're always going to be improving this, and adding more as we go. So that's hopefully an answer to the question about Spiral. Those AI tells are certainly all things that I look for in writing and or in AI outputs and delete immediately. So Spiral does have some of them built in. Pav asks, is there a particular reason for starting the workflow in Claude rather than Spiral? I will give that to you, Katie.
Yeah. To be honest, Spiral is a tool that I don't use as much in my workflow, just because at the time that I started working in this way with projects and style guides, Spiral was in its previous form. It wasn't the writing agent that it is today. It was more of a plug and play, input output kind of experience. And so the thing that I really appreciate about Spiral as it has evolved is that it gives you iteration, like different, like it'll show you 3 options and you can pick one and sort of dial in. So I think it's just a different writing experience, and it's one that I I'm going to be more actively involved in using Spiral. But for me, just the Claude project, it's just muscle memory. You get locked into a certain way of working, and then you have to, like, switching costs and things like that become like overhead that you don't want to have. And so it's just my Claude project just kind of pulls me in. So.
So then Isaac Parker asks, could your setup work better in Claude Cowork?
I have actually been I've been experimenting with Claude Code and Claude Cowork in the Claude app, and as well as the terminal, to sort of evolve my own writing process. This is very experimental, but I am working toward an agent version that kind of just is a little bit more flexible and personalized to me and like how I approach the writing process. And so I'm familiarizing myself with how this process changes with Claude Code or Claude Cowork, as the more user-friendly version is called. The big thing for me is getting used to working with MD files on your machine, like having folders on your desktop or somewhere in your physical machine that you put all this context in. Because a lot of the context, like the style guides, the skills, all of those things can be used in Cowork or Claude Code as well. It's just where they live is different. And so you have to get used to like knowing where to go to update your style guide, where to point Claude to find the examples that you want it to use as like, to help triangulate your style. So it's just a matter of familiarizing yourself with the particular features and nuances of the platform you're using, and going and working within those kinds of constraints.
So speaking of MD files, first of all, can you explain what an MD file is? What does it stand for?
It stands for Markdown, and it's a file format that AI really likes to work with. So, for example, are we allowed to talk about proof? We have,
sure.
We have a Markdown editor that we're working on internally that like Dan is spearheading, because specifically AI works really well with Markdown. And so like the symbology and all of that is stuff that it can pick up on really easily. So I saw something on Twitter that was just like, who would have predicted that the most powerful tool in the AI world would be a Markdown file, because it's a very basic just structure that has existed for ages.
So speaking of MD files, Persin Patel asks, can you produce MD files via Notion or connect Notion to Claude itself?
I am going to call an audible on that one because I'm not 100% sure as far as like what integrations are and are not possible on that front.
Got it. If anyone in the audience knows and wants to put it in comments, please feel free and we will answer that question. Luke asks, do you use any other tools?
Do I use any other tools for AI writing? Honestly, within the Claude ecosystem, whether I'm in the chat interface, the chat app, or Claude Code, or the terminal, between that and a Google Doc, like I think those, like in terms of technical tools, those are really that's really the tool set that I've found the most effective for my writing workflow. And so that's all that I've really needed. But there are a lot of tools out there, a lot that have like different use cases and different audiences. There are some tools that are very purpose built for content marketing. I come from the content marketing world, so I'm more familiar with those. There are certain platforms that are really geared toward enterprise, and so they have a lot of support for like compliance and things like that. So depending on your context and where you're writing, who you're writing for, there may be different platforms that might provide the support that you need for your particular use case.
And just David Frenzen confirming, yes, you can connect Notion and Claude Cowork and Claude Code. It is actually something I have done as well. So just look for your connector. Okay, we are going to go into the next tranche of questions, which is a little less tactical, a little bit more high concept, but it's about creativity, guardrails, and taste, which is a word we haven't actually really used just yet. Isaac Parker asks that with all the guardrails for setting up your style with samples, do you feel it can restrict output, creativity, or novel ideas?
It really can. And we talked about that a little bit with my, intro format getting very stale and very repetitive. And so there is a certain amount of constant vigilance, to use a Harry Potter word term, that you need to make sure that the writing is fresh. I think something that I'm still working out for myself on a philosophical level is the difference between like a signature move or a signature style and something that's just repetitive. Because what is style, like what is a signature versus what is like a template that's really like stale. And that's where the word taste comes in, is you just have to decide for yourself, like, does this feel alive to me or not? And that's like a very mushy thing, but if you feel like the content's getting repetitive, you've kind of got to trust your gut, and then it's a matter of thinking creatively about, okay, how can I talk to AI? What instructions can I give it to push it to think more creatively?
Got it. I should just say, if anyone else has any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. Next question. I know you referred to this in the writing camp. Alexandra Petrie asks, is there a process by which you quote unquote murder board something? Is it better with real people or AI?
Murder board?
I know that came up. I don't remember what it came up in reference to. So if we don't know, we can move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. If anyone remembers, let us know in the comments. Morgan asks, very high concept question. How are we defining writing in this context?
Oh man, that is a really big question. I mean, it's not constructing sentences word by word the way that trad writing is, if we can call it that. AI native writing, it really, like, to me, writing, what it does is it makes writing not higher level, but more like the analogy that I always use is it's going from bricklaying or like construction to sculpting or molding or like pottery. I think about like having like some raw material on a pottery wheel and you kind of shape it into the vase that you want. To me, that is the feeling of writing with AI versus when you're writing manually, you're like assembling it sentence by sentence. And so that I think is the difference. I still consider it writing. That's a controversial topic in many circles, whether working this way can be considered writing. But in my experience, I produce work this way that sounds like me, that I stand behind, that I'm proud of, and it feels like writing. Clear, like there's that line, clear writing is clear thinking, and this is I'm still actively engaged in the thinking process. I'm just thinking at a different level than that word by word, sentence by sentence level.
Right. And sort of you're thinking it's like you're sort of moved higher up a little bit, like higher up the process in terms of where that thinking happens. Kristen Hackler very helpfully explained that murder board is a way of visual planning. But these are when you map out all the pieces and parts and use thread to draw the lines between all of them, moving the line as you need until the flow makes sense. I don't know if this actually did come up, or maybe it was just a question in the comments. I'm having a visual of a sort of like spy show or Homeland with the crazy board of all the evidence moving around. But I don't know if you have anything more to add there, Katie.
I think I found like for what, like most of the writing that I do is like that 1,500 word sweet spot of it's long form, but not super long form. And so I found like just outlining and like making sure that I'm clear on the structure that way is enough to get the job done. But like you can definitely go into more elaborate forms of like planning and thinking depending on the complexity of the project you're working on.
Okay. So our last question from Friday's camp, I will share in a moment. And of course, if you do have additional questions, we have until 2:00, so another 12 minutes if you'd like to ask Katie or me anything else. Manus asks, how do you make AI write in your human tone without it sounding generic? Which is probably like the question.
It's really just about giving it examples. And as we've talked about, you may not have your own examples to start with, and then you just seed some, to get it started, you seed in some examples of writing you admire. And then I would like say that as you produce more content that sounds like you and that you're proud of, you can replace that. But ultimately, like I think like that this is where like you will always be manually involved in writing with AI. It's never going to be as simple as given an instruction and get out an output that is perfect and sounds exactly like you. You will be sort of getting into the guts of the writing at a certain point to, rough it up, make it sound more human, change an analogy that you wouldn't use to an analogy that, feels more specific and like personal to you. Those kinds of finishing touches that sort of like that, like I spend more time editing than I do writing in that sense, right? Like I spend a lot of my time being like, this isn't quite right, I'm going to switch it up to this and things like that. But that like I have the time to like I spend more time thinking in a weird way, thinking about the particular sentence. Like I'm kind of contradicting what I just said, but I do, once I have like that like basic structure laid out, I can spend more time dialing in the language to make it sound more like me, right. Because I'm not laboring over getting that first draft on the page.
Right. I think it's something we've talked a lot about here, how it kind of makes each writer brings in some of that editing that is maybe would have been done by someone else or not at all, but sort of makes every writer really have to, go in and say, yes, this is what I meant, or I want to say this differently, or no, and in a way that you didn't necessarily have to do when you were just writing from a completely blank page. It almost brings the editing level in to the writing in a way that it wasn't before, which has been a really interesting skill to see our writers embrace. We have one question in the comments from David, which is, will Every release any online course on writing this way with AI? It would be cool to see a deep dive into each of the stages of the writing process. So we actually have taught a course before called How to Write with AI. We taught it, I believe it was last year. And we are actively planning more courses for this year and beyond. It was very clear to us from Friday's camp, which was just an hour, that there were many, many questions, why we are here, but about really going deep into the process and really trying to understand Katie's process. So we're planning. We'll let you know. We do have an events page, every.to/events, where we do have all of our upcoming camps, courses, meetups, anything else that we're doing. So keep your eye out for that. But the best thing for us to know is if there is demand for this kind of thing. So if you are interested in this and would sign up and want to take it, let us know, and we will factor that into our planning. So if there are any other questions, we are here. And if not, Katie, are there any final thoughts? Anything you want to share?
The thing that I want to share most is read. The more you read, the more you engage with writing, the better you are going to be at articulating what you do and don't like. And not only reading the kind of writing you want to produce, but read writing about writing. Like, learn the craft of writing, learn the language of writing, the same way that if you're a coder, you know what a branch is, or what YAML front matter is. There's a parallel world of vocabulary and concepts and frameworks in writing that the more you're able to bring those in, the stronger your writing is going to be. So like the example that I always use one of the examples is like Kurt Vonnegut has these 8 principles of style of storytelling that I have always really loved. And so I was able to take those principles, batch them into a skill, and then I can invoke Vonnegut and get an analysis of how well my writing is aligning with those best practices. But I'm only able to get there because I'm familiar with Vonnegut. I'm familiar with these 8 this framework. And so the more ravenous you are is the word I have to learn about writing, the more success you're going to have getting AI to produce great writing for you.
So on that note, we did have just a quick question, what are the 3 best books to get better at nonfiction writing? You mentioned Vonnegut's 8 principles. Someone earlier, there had been a question about elements of style. What are the things that you would refer to?
Some of my canonical texts are on this front is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. I find that to be really good for internet writing in particular.
What is that book about? Can you just explain?
Made to Stick is about how ideas sort of like are conveyed and how they travel, and like how how to make ideas that will stay in the mind of the person hearing them. So that's a really good one. I have right here Hitmakers, How to Succeed in an Age of Distraction, which isn't necessarily so much about writing as it is more content more broadly, but he talks about things about like, making the new familiar and the familiar new, and like he has frameworks like that. We really love another one, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by George Saunders, which is actually, I'm only saying that in order to curry brownie points with Dan, but it's actually about short stories, but it has really good things to teach about like the selection of detail and how you, like the details that you choose, like create the story. And I think that there are really good learnings to have from that. So those are some of the books that I will also shout out The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. There's a lot of really great books out there. And I would encourage people not to limit themselves just to books about writing like mechanically, but writing conceptually, and just like ideas and what makes them compelling, because all of that is going to be relevant in terms of writing, particularly when the AI is taking care of things like whether to use an M dash or not.
Fantastic. So definitely a big theme is to write better, read more, read voraciously. That wraps up our questions. So thank you everyone for coming, for submitting these questions in the writing camp, and then coming here and spending this hour with us. We're really grateful. Any questions, you can always shoot a note to Every and we will respond. And we're really, we hope to do this again, and we'll see you soon. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.